What is up, everybody? The 2026 NFL Draft is complete, and so is the New York Giants offseason, pretty much. There's a couple more things that can happen, UDFAs and all that stuff, but it is complete. The New York Giants were making noise all offseason, hiring new head coach John Harbaugh, retaining Joe Schoen at GM, and they had everybody asking how they were going to maximize quarterback Jackson Dart in year 2. With a new head coach, the draft is always very telling, and so is free agency. So I'm going to review the entire Giants draft class, give a grade for each pick, and the class as a whole. In addition, I'm going to recall the coaching hires, free agency, just in a quick little flash, and combine all of that for an offseason grade for the Giants. At the end, I'll address any last steps the Giants can take to maximize this offseason, like potentially trading Kayvon Thibbodeaux, UDFAs, and the plan that I see for the Giants in 2026 and beyond. So guys, this is going to be a good one. Welcome to the pocket, everybody. I'm your host, Scott Franceschini, but you can call me Scooter, and I'm just so excited for this episode. A huge favor you can all do for me is to drop a like on the video so more fans can see this draft in full offseason grade video, and subscribe if you want to see more Giants and NFL content. So, the draft is like the Super Bowl of the offseason. Before, we have a couple months of quiet leading up to the season. So without further ado, let's dig into it. Just by quickly reminding everyone of the coaching hires and what needs we filled in free agency prior to the draft. So Harbaugh, he's a proven coach. We know he's had some issues late in games in Baltimore, but we know we're getting a culture changer, which we clearly needed. So I give that a B+. Defensive coordinator Denard Wilson, he runs a multiple front press zone scheme. He was impressive in Tennessee. You know, coaching a defense that lacked talent last year. I like this one too. I gave it a B. Offensive coordinator, we hired Matt Nagy and Greg Roman as a senior offensive assistant and run game coordinator. I'm not crazy about either of these two guys. I think Roman, yes, he's overqualified for his position, but I'm not sure how I feel about Nagy and how he'll manage the passing game, mesh with Roman, and manage play calling. I feel like this duo is a C+ grade. There's a lot to prove here. The potential is there, but I want to see them mesh properly. Overall, the coaching hires was a B, not bad. Maybe Harbaugh can maximize the offensive staff. They're really my only concern. All right, now let's move on to free agency. Just like I said, a quick flash just to remind everyone. The Giants signed tight end Isaiah Likely, linebacker Tremaine Edmonds, wide receiver Darnell Mooney, and Calvin Austin. Cornerback Greg Newsome II, nickel safety Ardarius Washington, fullback Patrick Ricard, punter Jordan Stout, kicker Jason Sanders, and long snapper Zach Triner. I like this free agency class, especially locking down the special teams with Stout, Sanders, and Triner. We let go of Bobby Okereke, but he had a down year, and we replaced him with Tremaine Edmonds and re-signed Micah McFadden. So we still lack depth at linebacker, but upgraded the starters. Greg Newsome, he's on a 1-year deal. That's solid for now, but he should hold down that outside cornerback 2 spot and keep Banks off of the field. I know we all want that. Ardarius Washington at nickel and safety. He will allow us to run 3 safety packages, and maybe he can start over Tyler Nubin in 2 safety sets if he fails to develop. Tight end Isaiah Likely. I love this. He's a great pairing with Theo Johnson for 12 personnel, and he can serve as a pseudo big slot wide receiver and should be the starting tight end. Patrick Ricard is a top-tier fullback in the league and a great special teamer. And wide receivers Darnell Mooney and Calvin Austin will challenge Darius Slayton for that deep threat role and perhaps work in a bit in the slot and for gadget plays. We signed some other guys, but these are the big names. I'd grade this free agent class a B. Some great contributors, no superstar, but that's okay. We're building something, we're not going all in here. Then, after free agency, we had a shocking turn of events as the Giants had a falling out with Dexter Lawrence and ended up trading him for the 10th overall pick, if you were living under a rock. In addition to having the 5th overall pick, they now had 2 top 10 picks, in addition to a 2nd, 4th, 5th, and 3 6th round picks for this draft. So where did this leave the Giants in terms of need? The Giants' big needs heading into the draft were right guard, as we had Daniel Falele and Evan Neal set to start there. Defensive tackle, after losing Dexter Lawrence was a huge need. Third-round pick Darius Alexander looked to be the best guy there. Linebacker, I do like Micah McFadden as an LB2, but just the depth behind him, and he's only on a one-year deal. Safety, Tyler Nubin, maybe he develops and maybe he doesn't. Ardarius Washington is pretty decent to work in the 3 safety sets, but we were definitely looking at making an upgrade there. We know Harbaugh loves his safeties. Maybe it is Javon Holland, but we know he likes a lot of them. Corner, Paulson Adebo's decent. Greg Newsome is decent. We just don't have that alpha guy, so if we were able to get him in the draft or someone with some upside, that would be good. And then for wide receiver, specifically the X wide receiver. I know there's not really a true slot wide receiver, but I don't think that's as big of a concern when we have someone like Isaiah Likely, who, like I said, is a pseudo-slot wide receiver. So we know with Harbaugh, the Giants, we're going to want to form a team that runs the ball, plays hard, and disciplined defense, all to help support the growth of Jackson Dart. And with these holes and what we saw last year, the O-line could be better and desperately needs depth. We lack weapons outside of Neighbors and the running backs. The run defense was awful and is now worse without Dexter Lawrence. And the coverage, especially late in games, was a big issue. I think Harbaugh's strenuous practices should help with the late game, kind of conditioning, the coverage that we had there. But let's see how they did in the NFL draft to support the future in Jackson Dart. So, in the first round, as I said, the Giants had the 5th and the 10th overall pick. We've seen this before, right? With Evan Neal and Kayvon Thibbodeaux. I know nobody wants to hear that. I know it's probably bringing up some bad memories, but it's an inevitable conversation that people are going to relate and compare these two classes. So, how did they do? With the 5th pick in the 2026 NFL Draft, the New York Giants selected Arvell Reese, linebacker / edge out of Ohio State. He's 6'4", 241 pounds, and he's only 20 years old. His best tape was at the edge, but he's raw, and he moved from linebacker to edge in college. He played all over Ohio State's defense. You'll hear Matt Patricia talk about this, but the athleticism is insane. He has elite get-off, speed to power, vicious and explosive pop in his hands. He keeps his feet moving through contact when engaged with a block. He's got elite athleticism that translates power to speed and fluid change of direction. He said he's barely practiced edge. He doesn't have any crazy pass rush moves yet, and you can see it in his tape. He's not like Abdul Carter when he was coming out. Against the run, massive linemen with long arms can move him off the ball. He's only 241 pounds, even if he is a super athlete. He's got shorter arms at 32.5 inches. He's not some elite edge setter in that way. From linebacker, from that standpoint, it's kind of inconsistent. The ability is absolutely there, but it's not always the fluidity you want when he's navigating through the trenches, engaging through blocks to find the ball. Kind of like when people think of an elite linebacker, they think of Fred Warner, just kind of flawlessly navigating all that traffic, breaking through blocks and separating and then, putting his helmet on the football. He is great, Arvell Reese, at avoiding blocks with his quickness, with that 1.56 10-yard split, but you can't always do that when you're, combating against the run. Sometimes you're going to have to engage the blocker and shed and get off. Coverage-wise, they didn't ask a lot of him, but he's looked good in zone, chasing down, crashing down on those kind of short passes for minimal gains with that 4.46 speed. And just overall, he's got all of the ability in the world. His best potential is at edge. You could see him as a pure kind of box safety, maybe even, if he developed in coverage and keeping him distanced from the linemen. Tight ends just stand no chance against him. The linebacker stuff, especially college to NFL, would take the longest, I think, to develop at. Kind of the shedding, it seems to be what he kind of struggles the most with. Harbaugh said they were going to play him at inside linebacker. Even if we trade Kayvon, Reese would be our third edge, after Carter and Brian Burns. So I want him to be able to play with confidence and fly to the ball and not have to think about what he has to do because he's great like that. But the assignments in the NFL worry me a bit as it just makes linebackers hesitate, and this always happens when guys are translating to the NFL. And, when you're hesitating, you could be all, the athlete you want to be. You're still, a whole second behind or a fraction, whatever it may be. I think the plan is to blitz him a lot and move him around. Denard Wilson runs multiple fronts and lots of stunts and stuff like that. I think that's the best way to maximize him while he gets more comfortable with the linebacker stuff. The GPA stuff, I don't put stock in it. It could be media training, with the way he's responded to those questions, but Ohio State defensive coordinator Matt Patricia just raved about him, calling him a sponge and how much he wants to learn. I'm not concerned with the noise about his high school GPA. So overall, the way I'm going to talk about each of these picks is I'm going to talk about the value, the need, and the process. So starting off with the value, this is the best part of this pick. It's amazing value. He was not supposed to be there. He was top of the Giants board, best player available. That's what they said they were going to do. What do you know? He ends up being there and they end up taking him. He's only 20 and he's already an amazing athlete. Just imagine in 2 to 3 years when he fills out edge or linebacker, regardless, he's going to be a force to be reckoned with. Now the need, it's all right. I mean, if he can really settle into linebacker too, that's awesome. But what he does best is rush the passer, and we obviously don't need more of that. This is a new regime, so players like Kayvon and even Brian Burns could be on the move in the next year or so, and this would be spectacular in the long term to, take a guy at a premium position back-to-back years with him and Carter and just have that be the duo. But if it's just linebacker, it was a need too, so it's all right. It's just kind of shaky. Process-wise, it's solid. To go best player available, it's a great long-term play, but as things stand now with Kayvon on the squad, it's really clunky, especially with him. We said a lot of this stuff last year about Abdul, and it turned out all right, but now we're throwing another player into that mix, and it's just a little more clunky. If Kayvon is gone at some point in the future, I would feel much better about it. As it stands right now, we have 4 first-round picks essentially at edge, so I think with Kayvon, we got to move on. So the grade for this pick for me is going to be a B+. I know a lot of people are raving about, the value and saying it's an A+. It's a steal, best player available, a steal. He was supposed to go second overall. But because of the risk, the semi-lack of need, that's why I'm kind of dinging it a little bit, but it really is amazing value. We got one of the best players in the draft here, so it's still going to be a B+, and honestly, it's a strong B+, because this could change very quickly with a Kayvon trade or just depending on how we decide to start him. If he gets enough snaps, it's going to an A. So that's the Arvell Reese pick. What did the Giants do at pick 10? With the 10th pick, the New York Giants, they had Caleb Downs on the board, but they ended up selecting Francis Mauigoa, the offensive tackle out of Miami. He's 6'5", 330 pounds, 33.25-inch arms, and he also is only 20 years old. He played right tackle. Like I said, he's kind of got shorter arms, but the Giants said he's going to kick inside to play guard, and I think that's awesome. This will be a much more straightforward kind of evaluation than Reese, who is much more of a gamble, and there's a lot to hash through. Mauigoa wasn't the first offensive lineman taken, but he was sort of the consensus top lineman in the draft next to guard Vega Owane, who the Giants also could have taken to fill the spot at right guard. But the choice to me to take him over Vega was intentional. The reason I wanted Mauigoa over Vega before the Dexter trade, I was still picking him at number 5, is specifically due to Andrew Thomas's health. For now, he's going to be our starting right guard, but if AT goes down, we have flexibility between Mauigoa, Illuminor, and Mbo to find the best 2 starting tackles to fill in. Illuminor is also 32 years old, so this is our long-term replacement there if he can eventually kick out to right tackle again. For Mauigoa, the player, this is why he was the best lineman in the class. He hasn't missed a game and started it all 3 years. His hand usage is great. He's got good grip strength. He's got good feet that keep moving, especially in the run game. And he's got a good anchor at 330 pounds. He's a good athlete who plays with an aggression, and he's looking to put defenders on their back. Concerns would be the arm length, giving up his inside, or opening up to the sideline too soon. People mention that the spin move tends to get him sometimes, and that's the sort of thing that happens when you open up too soon. But the thing is if you're a guard, you're going to be facing forward more so and engaging and battling with your hands in pass pro rather than kind of, the battle of the hips, to, when to open up and to, make that gamble and time it up against the defensive end. So he projects to be even better at guard than tackle. Run blocking, though, he's just awesome. Double teams, he gets movement and peels off to linebackers. down blocks, he runs his feet, and he stays on the block. One-on-one, he's powerful, he's mean, he generates torque through his core that looks really strong. He moves defenders where he wants them to go. He's a great run blocker. So some mention as to the run blocking that outside zone could be a concern. He could be better at it, but you know, he runs his feet, and he gets good torque to kind of get around. And even though that's not going to be a big play for the Giants, the outside zone, it's something that Mauigoa can grow in and eventually become a quality blocker in there too. A fun little thing is on DraftNet, he pulled a Will Campbell. He said, "I will die for Jackson Dart" when he was getting interviewed on the stage, and you just love to see that. So now let's talk about the value you need in process. To me, this is great value. I mean, top 2 linemen in the class, without debate, him and Vega Ioane. Many projected him to be top 5, and the Giants were patient. They took best player available at 5, and then they were able to get Mauigoa at 10. So really like the value of getting a guy like that at 10. The need, 100%, this was a need to me. And it goes without question. I mean, we had a massive hole at right guard already. And it's picks like this that secure the future of Jackson Dart when it comes to protection and the run game that we want to establish for him and just with the culture in general. Process-wise, I think this is great process. You got a high upside player at 5, and we're able to get the player you really needed at 10. I'm a huge fan of this selection. It is my favorite pick in this draft. I understand, though, some people are upset. Caleb Downs fell to the next pick, to the Cowboys. But it's the Giants' responsibility to improve their team and take what they need most. It's not their responsibility to prevent the Commanders at 7 or the Cowboys at 11 from getting any particular player if drafting them still leaves a glaring weakness on the Giants. They were both picking in the top 11, and they were going to get some studs either way. So ultimately, my grade for this pick is going to be an A. Premium position of need, best in the class. I just love everything about this pick. Now, moving on to the second round, the Giants had picked 37, and who did they end up going with? They selected Colton Hood, cornerback out of Tennessee, 5'11 and a half, 193, pretty good size for a corner, 21 years old, and ran a 4.44 40-yard dash at the combine. He was the third corner to come off the board in this draft. Most teams had him top 5 before the news of his teammate Jermod McCoy's impending injury that was going to need another surgery and that he wasn't going to be able to play this year. So, I really liked, the idea of him being someone that ended up climbing closer and closer to draft day. Colton Hood's a great athlete. He has good size for the position. He's best in press man coverage, that bump and run kind of stuff. He's decent in quarters, while he's got some work to do when it comes to zone coverage. When it comes to run defense, he's a good tackler, but he does need better recognition when he's being run off by a wide receiver or, willingness to get off of blocks when he's engaged with, a blocking wide receiver. And right now, hearing that, Giants fans are having PTSD of Deonte Banks and the run defense that, he showed us so graciously during the season. But when you're considering that kind of thing, you just got to wonder if, are you just a bump and run kind of man corner? Is there more to your game? Are you just only concerned with that when you're struggling to learn zone coverage as well? Well, let me say this. The good thing is that those weaknesses of zone and kind of play recognition, unlike man coverage, which is much more instinctual, are the easier parts of corner to coach a player in. Considering the scheme fit with Denard Wilson as scheme for corner is probably the most important position for scheme on defense, it's interesting because Denard Wilson runs zone heavy, but he does emphasize the press coverage, so there's that. It seems that they hope that if they can teach him the zone coverage and the attitude for run defense, that in Denard Wilson's defense, you'd have a really well-rounded number 1 corner. Now, Harbaugh and Wilson's coaching will be put to the test with Colton Hood, and we will see if they can get the most out of him when it comes to that. So that's my view on that pick. The value, I would say it's solid. Like I said, there were some people who had him as high as top 3 corners, right behind McCoy and Delane. But then some of his critics even, they wouldn't put him much lower than 6. So, I think it's good value to get a guy like that in the second round. It's probably where he should have went. Solid. Need, compared to the other needs we had, like defensive tackle, wide receiver 2 and safety, I think there's some conversation that you can have there, and that leads us into the process. It's up in the air for me when it comes to this one. There was a lot the Giants could have done here. At corner, they do have Greg Newsome, Paulson Adebo at outside corner. There was still a huge void at defensive tackle, and Kristen Miller went just a few picks later. For wide receiver, they signed Mooney and Austin, but some studs like Denzel Boston fell and went just a few picks later to the Browns. I do also I will give you this, that Mooney and Austin, kind of like Newsome and Adebo, or Mooney and Austin are on one-year deals along with Greg Newsome. But the Giants do have Malik Neighbors as a number one alpha wide receiver, and they want to run the ball. So wide receiver 2 versus, making sure you have that alpha corner. I get it. So overall, my grade for this pick is a B-. Dinging it just a little bit because you kind of could have done anything here. That the scheme fit is a question, but the value's solid, and I think we got a good player here. So my grade for Colton Hood is a B-. All right. Moving on to the next pick in the 3rd round, the Giants did not have a 3rd round pick coming into the draft, but they ended up trading a 4th round pick and 5th round pick this year, our 2 picks that we had this year in the 4th and 5th round, and a 4th round pick in 2027 to move up into the 3rd round to make this selection. So who did they take at pick 74? It was wide receiver out of Notre Dame, Malachi Fields. Malachi Fields is 6'4 and a half, 218 pounds, and he's 22 years old. Him as a prospect and why the Giants took him is very straightforward. Malachi Fields is a former high school quarterback who converted to wide receiver when he first enrolled to Virginia. Since then, he's been learning the art, and while he's come a long way, there's still a lot to work on. Route running, releases, and quickness are not strengths of his game. But what are strengths to me is exciting. It's that X wide receiver stuff. He is massive at not just 6'4", but nearly 220 pounds. He ran a 4.61 at the combine, but he definitely looks faster than that to me, at least on the tape. His catch radius is pretty insane. He's got a great ability to track the ball and high point it with sudden hands, and he makes some really spectacular catches. 30% of his catches were 20 yards downfield or more. He brought in 48% of his contested catches, which isn't crazy by any means, but 27% of his targets were uncatchable, which was the 4th highest in the class. So, some inconsistencies, maybe working in there and, hoping that you can just get him focused on this. That's something that you can maximize and, really turn into an elite trait of his. And then for yards after the catch, obviously at his size, he's tough to bring down. And when he runs the curls and the hitches, just stopping him from getting an extra couple yards there is definitely tough. So, and then the last thing is, with his size, he might be the best run blocking wide receiver in the class, which is obviously something the Giants want to do. And I can actually see him getting a lot of snaps this year because of that. So, as I mentioned, he's pretty raw when it comes to the route running, but go balls, he's a threat. And then on hitches and curls, he does show pretty good snap on his break. So there's potential and hope for the other routes that you'd like him to learn. So for value, need, and process, this is a great spot for wide receiver, 3rd round, 2nd round. People talk about it all the time, but I did find it interesting that they selected him over Chris Brazzell, Ted Hurst, and Zachariah Branch. But then again, that was kind of my initial feeling. I kind of get it more now. The Giants have plenty of deep threats and slot-capable guys that Zachariah Branch would have been, Brazzell and Hurst as the deep threats. But the Giants haven't had a true X in such a long time. So it was a solid landing spot to get a guy like that. This is the perfect fit for what we needed there. Compared to defensive tackle, most of the top guys were gone. So this is kind of a money spot for wide receiver. But it is interesting that run support safety, A.J. Halsey out of LSU, went just a few picks later. But we do have 3 starting safeties if you consider Tyler Nubin, but no X wide receiver on the roster. So the fit is pretty good. Process. After some safer picks in Mauigoa and Hood, we see the Giants kind of lean back into that boomer bust mentality with this pick. I like the pick itself, but I will say trading a 4th and 5th this year, along with a 2027 4th, is quite the price to move up. That would tell me that they definitely have plans for Fields that is more than just run blocking and fade balls. I do think he's a good fit with Jackson Dart, who likes to throw those 50-50 balls and really give his wide receiver a chance. It kind of reminds me of that spurt when we had little Jordan Humphrey, but he's definitely bigger. weight-wise, and he's going to get some snaps in this year in 2 and 3 wide receiver sets. The run blocking, like I said, so I think it's decent process. So my grade overall for it is a B- for the pick itself, but the trade was definitely costly. But it's, I think, good value to get a wide receiver like this where you got him. So that's my analysis of Malachi Fields in the 3rd round, and the Giants go on a big break because they traded that 4th and 5th round pick. So they don't pick again until the 6th round, but they did have 3 6th round picks. So what did they end up doing with those picks? At pick 186, the Giants selected Bobby Jamison-Travis, defensive tackle out of Auburn. He's 6'3.5", 330 pounds, 25 years old, or at least he will be probably by the time you're watching this video, but 34.25-inch arms, pretty long arms. He's a former JUCO kid, so what a story for him to make it to the big league. Super happy for him. He didn't work out at the combine, but he's got good short area quickness. He's good with his hands, but he doesn't have a ton of pass rush moves. He's a former wrestler, and I love it when guys who are playing football are former wrestlers, especially the guys who are in the trenches, who are really battling with their hands and, body control, because just the torque, the body control, and the explosiveness you learn in wrestling is really second to none. And you can see it in his game with his quickness, his explosiveness, and his ability in his hands to hand fight. So Bobby Skinner did tweet out something pretty interesting that Bobby Jamison-Travis had the 2nd highest run stop rate in the class next to Caden McDonald, which is exactly what we needed out of a defensive tackle pick. So what do I feel about the value, the need, and the process? To me, this is great value. He wasn't some steal compared to where most people had him, but this was just, like I said, exactly what we needed. This is a 6th round pick who may end up being a starter for us. Some people may question why not Tim Keenan, but I suppose BJT, which, yes, I already gave him that nickname, may have more pass rush upside. And when it comes to Dante Corleone, he's got a foot injury. He did not end up getting drafted, so that's why we took him over him, I believe. The need, this was absolutely a need. It's risky waiting this long for a defensive tackle, but it's one of those positions you can wait on, as it's kind of, the run-stopping defensive tackle is not like a premium position. So the need was definitely there. And then the process. This is good process. You took other premium positions like wide receiver and corner in the 2nd and 3rd round, and then you waited on defensive tackle. He's not going to generate pressure like Dexter Lawrence. He's probably not going to be a run stopper like Dexter Lawrence. Pretty much nobody is, but he is a run stopper, and you can always find defensive tackles like that late, and we did right here. So my grade for this is a B. For what it is, we got a guy who's likely to get some snaps at a minimum and may turn into a full-time starter if he develops. So BJT, I like the pick. Up next, only a few picks later at pick 192, the Giants selected J.C. Davis, offensive tackle out of Illinois. He's 6'4.5", 322 pounds, 22 years old. He's got 34.25-inch arms, long arms. Some analysts out there had him as high as a 3rd or 4th round grade. He's got great size and a great wingspan. It looks like he could kick inside for the Giants too. He's similar in size to Jermaine Illuminor. He's got nice reach with those long arms, and the problems with him is that there's some inconsistency in his pass pro. He can get sloppy, and he's kind of got weaker, kind of balance from, having a weaker core. But he's very athletic. He's got good recovery in pass pro. He's not an amazing run blocker. He needs to run his feet more. But he could be a future guard for us and a decent backup tackle, and maybe even develop, further down his career into a starter. And perhaps, if he kicks inside, after we move on from John Runyon, maybe he could replace him at left guard. So what do I think about the value, need, and process for J.C. Davis? Great value. I think to get a lineman with, down the line starting upside in round 6, you cannot go wrong with that. I mean, a lot of people, like I said, were much higher than the 6th round on him for that. So, I really like the value there, the need. Like I said with Mauigoa, not only is O-line a need for the Giants, but it's just the most important unit in football. You can never have enough of these guys. You can never throw enough darts. You never know when you're going to hit on a Jordan Mailata. No, he doesn't have the athletic upside of a Jordan Mailata, but he could turn into a starter with proper coaching. So The need, it's always there for every team. And then process. Like I said, the value in the value portion, this is good value at an important position. You could see snaps out of a guy like this year if we have injuries, or as soon as next year if we move on from Runyon. So you can never go wrong taking a lineman late, and if he becomes a starter, it's a steal. So my grade for this one is going to be an A-. I love the value, and I love the position that we took. And then finally, the next pick 193, the last pick in the Giants 2026 NFL Draft, they end up selecting Jack Kelly, linebacker out of BYU. He's 6'1.5", 240 pounds, 23 years old, and this guy had a 9.73 RAS score. That's ranked 99 out of 3,480 linebackers since 1987. So obviously he had a pretty nice combine, ran a 4.57 at 240 pounds. He had a 37-inch vertical jump and a 10.5 broad jump. And this athleticism is reflected in his nasty play style. He's had 2 forced fumbles in each of the last 2 years. He had 5 sacks in 2024 and an interception. And then in 2025, he had 10 sacks and 13.5 tackles for loss. Now, BYU isn't the highest level of competition, but it's pretty clear the type of player he is. He's an aggressive bulldog type of player who loves putting his helmet on the football and making plays. He's a great athlete and a great blitzer. So why did a guy like this fall to the 6th round? Well, he does make splash plays, but down against the run, he can struggle to get off blocks. He hesitates at times reacting to the ball, and he's not amazing in coverage because of those things. So honestly, he reminds me a lot of Micah McFadden. I've already heard people make that comparison. I think it's totally true. And he's just, a decent athlete. Micah McFadden, and he's a good blitzer, and he's good at finding the ball and making some plays here and there. So yeah, I definitely think you think we got him in the 5th, and we got Jack Kelly here in the 6th round. So very, very similar type of player. So how do I feel about the value, need, and process? Now, a lot of people had Kelly as more of a 5th round pick. Obviously with what I listed off to you, you can imagine some people being high on him. I do think it's good value. And he's definitely got potential and could make some plays at least in year 1 as a special teamer, or if there's injuries, he might get in there as a starter. Now the need, after picking Reese, Kelly is going to be competing with Darius Musow as the linebacker 4. But if we do eventually convert Reese to edge and lose McFadden because he's only on a 1-year deal, Kelly could step into the linebacker 2 role as soon as 2027. So down the road, I see the need. But as of this year, not necessarily a huge need at this point in the draft. And then process. I think this is a solid process. The linebacker, it takes time to develop in the NFL. So taking a guy like this who's got a lot of potential and athleticism late, giving him at least a year to learn the ways of the NFL, and having a path for him to start in the future is good value at a non-premium position, kind of like the defensive tackle pick, getting a potential playmaker who just needs to read and react more consistently to be trusted as a starter. So my grade for this pick is going to be a B. Good value, good positional selection for the pick, and now we have better depth at a position that we initially, needed a lot more depth at. It was a huge problem last year. So as an overview, at the 5th overall pick, Arvell Reese, I gave that a B+. At pick 10, Francis Mauigoa, I gave that an A. At pick 37, Colton Hood, cornerback, I gave that a B-. At pick 74, Malachi Fields, wide receiver, I gave that a B-. At pick 186, all the way in the 6th round, Bobby Jamison-Travis, the defensive tackle, I gave that a B. At pick 192, J.C. Davis, offensive tackle, I gave that an A-. And then pick 193, Jack Kelly, I gave that a B, linebacker. So overall, I loved what the Giants did early and late in this draft, attacking the trenches. I feel good about those picks. Hood and Fields are going to need some coaching. For Hood to fit properly in the scheme and for Fields to develop into an NFL caliber starter who can do more than run block, run goes, hitches, and curls. There's a nice balance of risk at the top between Reese and Fields as kind of the riskier guys, and then Mauigoa and Hood as definitely the safer picks. We know the Giants want to run the ball and have a great defense and stop the run. And with 2 offensive linemen, 2 sort of linebacker blitzing edge guys, and then a defensive tackle, I feel that they did a good job of addressing that need. The trade up for Fields is definitely a question. Giving up a fourth in next year's loaded class and a fourth and fifth this year, that's a lot to give up. So I feel like he's the most boomer bust guy, but he could turn into a fun and valuable player. It's just, people are always going to compare him to that trade. So it feels like the Giants did address some current needs. While they definitely, in this draft, it serves well for 2027 and beyond for a nice long-term plan. It seems like a lot of this is planned for 2027. So I would give this draft a strong B+. There's going to be some people who, graded an A- and all that kind of stuff. I am baking in the risk and the conversation that, that surrounds Reese, and it was the same one that surrounded Abdul last year while still having Burns and Kayvon. That conversation's real. The Giants have to maximize him. And if playing him at linebacker, like they said they were going to do this year, is what they end up doing, so be it. But either way, they have to coach him up to either be an elite linebacker soon or make room for him to start next to Carter on the edge. So that kind of leads us into our next conversation. What's next? Right, the draft is over, but I said the offseason's complete. I kind of lied. It's not really complete, but it's pretty much over. But there's a couple things that we still need to talk about. Trading Kayvon Thibbodeaux. After day one, the Giants said they had no interest in trading Kayvon. To me, that was a clear, desperate attempt to regain any leverage. Then day two, rumors swirled about a potential deal with the Saints, but nothing happened, and the Saints ended up trading for Raiders defensive end Tyree Wilson for pick 150, a fifth-round pick. Kayvon is certainly much better than Wilson has been, though they're both disappointing top 7 picks. I would imagine we were probably demanding at least a third and wouldn't budge, so they took the better value deal, for whatever you feel about Tyree Wilson. But now we still have Kayvon. And though having 4 first-round picks at edge means even if an injury occurs, we will have 4 starting, pass rushers who are at least pretty good. And if someone gets hurt, you're always going to have someone to step up. But I'm just disappointed. We weren't able to turn this into a pick or player that we could use at a position of need and fill the holes on this roster and really eliminate any weaknesses the Giants were going to have, like defensive tackle. So I feel this is what's best for the team, to move on from Kayvon, even if he is kind of the best edge against the run, to be honest. But we've just got to make room for Carter and Reese. Your 3rd and 5th overall picks the past 2 years, they have to be on the field. They can't have their growth stunted by not getting as many snaps as they possibly can. So maybe Reese is our true linebacker 2, and Kayvon is just edge 3, but it just feels like a missed opportunity. I'd love to get a 2027 pick for him at this point, but I don't know if that's going to happen. Now, cap space-wise, just as a quick note, the Giants currently have $18 million in cap space, and this is important because of free agents and undrafted free agents. So, that Dexter Lawrence trade, there was, that upside to it. UDFAs, the Giants signed Thibbodeaux Dixon out of North Carolina. He's a cornerback. And kicker Dominic Zaveda to develop behind Jason Sanders. Now, there's tons of guys I know the Giants would love to bring in based on the press conference that I watched, but we should definitely try to add some more defensive tackle help. Corleone is still out there with the injury. So, UDFAs, it's just something to keep an eye on. All right, I'm coughing my head off here, but we got our last 2 subjects here. So let's finish strong here. Free agents. I watched the post-draft press conference of Joe Schoen and John Harbaugh. Now, they were asked about DJ Reader, and they said they've been in contact with multiple agents of defensive tackles. So that's definitely what I still view as our biggest hole. I definitely think they are going to bring in someone. We have currently Darius Alexander as like a 3-tech. We'll see. He's got good upside. Roy Robertson Harris working in there at the 3-tech spot. And then we have Marlon Toy-Pelotu competing with BJT. Hopefully one of them hits, but it'd just be nice to bring in DJ Reader, a bit more upside and a veteran presence at that spot. Now, that's the free agent conversation. Now, I just want to bring up one last thing, guys. Very interesting idea. I'm just going to float it out there. Should the Giants trade Brian Burns in the near future? It's just a fun idea. I was thinking about Burns, the edge room, and the future after round 1 was over. And in 2 years, in 2028, the Giants will have many players that they need to re-sign. Pretty much everyone in the 2025 draft class and Andrew Thomas is signed through them, but that's it. Neighbors is going to need an extension after 2027, and we have this thing with Reese and Carter being at their best if they're both full-time edge rushers. So Brian Burns is 28, And while he's been great for us, he's going to have a big cap hit. And that franchise guy, Marcus Whitman, has been very vocal about this 16.5 sack season that Brian Burns had last year, saying it was a bit fraudulent, making a cut up that 12.5 of his sacks he just basically walked into where he did not beat the offensive lineman in front of him. So check out that franchise guy's Twitter at TFG_football. If Brian Burns doesn't repeat that type of season, another year older, he'll be 29. His trade value is going to go down. I understand. He has been an amazing leader of our defense. And you can even see, I got his jersey, man. I love this guy. I'm not pushing for this, absolutely hard, but I think we should consider it. If we can't get something worthwhile for Kayvon, maybe we can ride out this last year with Kayvon, have Reese and Carter next year, and just trade Burns, right? Instead. We could get a player back to absorb some of that cap space because it's kind of too late to sign any big free agents. Or we can get a highly anticipated 2027 draft pick and have a ton of cap space for the future. We can also get right to putting Reese and Carter on the edge and developing that duo. I'm not saying I feel so strongly that this has to happen, but I want to know what you all think. So let me know in the comments. Have you thought about trading Brian Burns, and should we do it? Right? He's a great player, but it just might be what's best for the football team. So overall, the offseason grade after the coaching hires, free agency, and the draft. Coaching hires, I would say it's a B. Free agency is a B. And the draft is a B+. So you put that all together, and I would say the Giants' offseason grade is a B+. Their roster got more talented for sure, and they cut some loose ends. The young talent is another year in, and most of the key young guys like Neighbors and Scadaboo on offense had season-ending injuries last year. They will be back this year. I like the way we attacked our needs in free agency and the draft. I think the roster has a lot more depth for the first time in many years, but we did lose our best player in Dexter Lawrence, and the defense is going to be put to the test after that. So most importantly, though, I'd say I loved Brian Daboll, but I think the culture was weak and easy on the players under him. We are going to now push career Giants harder than they've been pushed in the past 4 years, and I'm excited to see if that hard-nosed mentality and that really tough mentality can really translate to better conditioning and urgency in games. So overall, I'm happy with what John Harbaugh did and where the Giants are going. Well, that is all, everyone. My 11 pages of notes that I took all day to make just for you guys to see this morning. If you're still watching at this point, you are a legend, and I appreciate you. And if you could, please just take a second to drop a like on the video so more Giants fans can see this draft and full offseason grade video, and subscribe if you want to see more Giants and NFL content. Thank you all so much for watching. I love you guys, and I will see you in the next one. Peace out.